This week, the White House released a budget plan for the coming year. It of course lays out the long-awaited infrastructure plan, along with other legislative priorities. While nothing is set in stone, I think you're going to be very interested in what this thing says. I'm Iziah Thompson, and I'm explaining the Trump administration's new Foundation for American Greatness proposal. The budget is chock full of some big-ticket items and changes, so I'll separate them into 5 parts: education, science and environment, healthcare, social safety net, deficit, and infrastructure. So let's get started on what Trump has laid out for the education spending. It's important for you to know that less than 10% of overall education costs come from federal dollars. But ask a teacher and administrator, these dollars matter. Imagine 10% of your salary going missing. Yeah, not too happy, huh? We shouldn't forget that in some states, schools couldn't even keep the heat running this winter. Others couldn't even guarantee clean, healthy water. The plan cuts 5.3% or $3.6 billion from the $63 billion Department of Education budget. The 2 programs that see the steepest cuts are Title II, which is used to recruit and retain teachers, and the 21st Century Learning Centers block grants, which pays for enrichment programs after school, particularly in high poverty communities. Also on the chopping blocks are grants to support safe and healthy schools and the Special Olympics. Trump does want to increase funding for 2 proposals. He wants to fund what are called opportunity grants that could go to school vouchers for charter, private, and parochial schools. And lastly, President Trump wants $75 million for the Health and Human Services Department to fund abstinence only and personal responsibility sex education. This follows his appointment of Valerie Huber, a longtime abstinence education advocate, to the HHS. Huber told PBS earlier this year that as a public health expert and policymaker, she must normalize sexual delay more than she normalizes teen sex, even with contraception. This is in spite of the fact that loads of research shows abstinence-only programs aren't just ineffective, they often have an impact opposite to that which they are intended. The evidence is pretty clear on this one. We've known for a while now that reasonable informing of sexual education, paired with access to reproductive health care, that include contraception, does well to prevent STDs and teenage pregnancy. But I feel like I'm beating at the drum at this point. Moving along. Higher education also sees big changes under the president's plan. It completely decimates income-based repayment plans and ends public service loan forgiveness programs. That means less people willing to take low pay after graduation to serve as public servants. That means less prosecutors, less public defenders, less law enforcement, EMTs, firefighters, military members, and many other fields. It also gives the government a green light, really, when it comes to going after students who don't pay their loans. Cuts funding for federal work study in half and completely eliminates subsidized loans. Those helped 5.7 million students attend college last academic year. The plan hurts graduate students the most. And that brings us to our next section, science and the environment. The bill outright calls for massive cuts in spending on scientific research, medical research, disease prevention, and health insurance for children of the working poor. When it comes to science, it appears that the idea is kind of what we don't know won't hurt us. The National Cancer Institute would be cut by $1 billion. The National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute would be cut by $575 million. And the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases would lose $838 million. The administration would cut the National Institutes of Health's budget from $31.8 billion to $26 billion. The National Science Foundation, which dispenses grants to a variety of scientific research endeavors, will be slimmed by $776 million, or 11%. You get the point. The budget tells us that the Trump administration sees observatories and telescopes as completely and utterly useless. It stops NASA from attaching an infrared survey telescope to a satellite we already have. It could just be used, detect near-Earth asteroids and save all life on our planet, that's all. The plan shuts down all 3 satellites that produce detailed climate records. And the biggest surprise, I guess, is the closing of the Orbiting Carbon Observatory. which has only been running for 4 years. It's the most accurate monitor of Earth's carbon dioxide fluxes. Closing it means ending the collection of the most important climate change data we have. Other agencies to see cuts are the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Geological Survey, and one of the 2 tsunami warning program centers would also be shut down. Oh, and 250 jobs at the National Weather Service will be gone, yeah. Grants that fund research for oceans, Arctic coasts, with the exception of coal and natural gas in this bill, will lose money. President Nixon's EPA will completely lose the ability to fund any research, as well as any of its enforcement ability for the Clean Water and Air Acts, leading us to the next portion of the bill. Something we'll need if that part passes: healthcare. The budget calls for huge cuts to healthcare for the elderly and poor. It includes yet another proposal to end Obamacare. It slashes Medicare. That's the program that pays for elderly healthcare by $237 billion. That's 7.1%. This is despite the fact that the president told voters that he wouldn't cut it on the campaign trail.
Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security without cuts. Have to do it.
And I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid.
You don't get rid of Medicare. You can't do that. People love Medicare, and it's unfair to them.
It does this by lessening payments to providers and by claiming to reduce wasteful treatment. It's important to note that the Affordable Care Act did both of those things, and it increased the number of people that were covered. It also ends 22.5% of the Medicaid and Obamacare subsidies. These go to pay for impoverished people's health care. Many Medicare recipients also use Medicaid due to high copays. As for the Obamacare repeal, you'll remember the Graham-Cassidy amendment from the dramatic Repeal Replace episode in Congress in the fall. Well, Trump has offered it in this bill, despite it not passing before. A little refresher, the replacement rolls back Medicaid funding for poor adults and allows states to choose what counts as health care. This means states can allow insurance companies to deny patients with pre-existing conditions. Again. And according to the CBO, it could lead to 20 million more Americans becoming uninsured. And speaking of leaving the poor out to dry, let's talk about the social safety net. Trump's budget would cut Section 8 housing by 20% or $47 billion. It cuts disability programs by making the criteria and eligibility stricter. And it eliminates the low-income home energy assistance program completely. As for SNAP or food stamps, this budget cuts it by 27%. And if you haven't read the headlines yet, I'll fill you in on how it makes those cuts to food stamps. The plan will dole out half of the $1.40 per person per meal in the form of a delivery box. Yes, the government will take half of the money poor people are given to go to farmers markets, grocery stores, and choose what they get in the mail and call it the American Harvest Box. What's in the box, you may ask? No fresh produce or meat, mostly dried pasta, peanut butter, shelf-stable milk, and canned fruits and vegetables sent to SNAP recipients. The White House Budget Director Nick Mulvaney called this a Blue Apron program. This program is far from Blue Apron. I don't know what he's talking about. Food packed in sodium-soaked cans seems to be what the administration thinks the poor deserve for being poor. Because, well, it's their fault, right? Stagnant wages aren't to blame. Bad food choices are, of course. Just like the way we millennials can't afford houses because we eat too much avocado toast. Right. Speaking of wasting money, let's see what this budget does to the national deficit. The Pro-Balanced Budget Group, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which is a pretty non-biased, reliable source of rigorous budget analysis, says that the president's budget has a total of $3.1 trillion in savings relative to current law. Now, that is, if we see the 3% growth in the economy the president promised. But even with that, not so fast. Over the next 10 years, the plan balloons the deficit by $7 trillion. But how does the deficit increase with all the cuts to everything? From helping the poor to science to, well, helping the poor. you may ask? $777 billion will go to increase defense spending. Right, of course. $550 billion will go towards those new tax cuts. Ding. Remember those? Even the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, has accused the Republican-controlled Congress of bankrupting the country and robbing future generations of Americans to pay for it. So we've covered everything. Wait, what? Oh, we forgot something. If you felt like something was missing, you were right. There is a mention of, a little infrastructure program that we should probably talk about. $199 billion over 10 years will go to this new infrastructure program. The unfortunate thing is that this only covers a small portion of what we need to get over our country's D+ infrastructure grade. The plan is meant to incentivize private companies to build, with a promise of profit to the tune of $1 trillion. The only issue is that these private companies get to choose what they rebuild and where they invest. That means rickety bridge that takes your kids to and fro school probably won't get rebuilt. That public train that adds hours worth of delays to your commute every morning, probably not lucrative. But the road to that new casino or luxury apartment railroad stop, those will be first priority. And there's another catch. The plan is paid for by taking money from the public transportation budget, 28% to be precise. So quite a few planned public roads, bridges, and tunnel projects could be scrapped to help pay for infrastructure in the rich parts of town. Thankfully, some of the money will go to municipalities and states, but even these funds are mostly for projects of national significance. So the big question is, will this pass? Most likely not. But, well, it's good for telling what the administration's priorities are. Though some parts actually could get through Congress while others definitely won't. For example, the huge cuts have the least likely chance of passing because they are part of discretionary spending. These proposals are filibusterable, and Democrats will definitely filibuster if they have to. And they will have to. Republicans know that they will filibuster the filibusterable parts, so most of the drastic cuts are already off the table. To prevent a filibuster, of course. Healthcare cuts, on the other hand, could pass. We'll have to see where Congress as a whole stands on many of these issues, but we know that the final product will not look anything like this. But if you do see a proposal or two in this plan carried out, do not be surprised. I'm Iziah Thompson at DailyCLout, and this was Iziah Explains the Budget Proposal. Follow me on Twitter at Isaiah_Thompson or on Instagram at I_know_creative. Check out our website at DailyCLout.io for more updates on legislation and political news. Thanks for watching, and for democracy's sake, stay vigilant.